Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike Phillips. This is the Leadership Toolkit. It's the definitive leadership training podcast, teaching podcast for you to grow yourself and grow your people and just be able to impact others that are in your space. So I'm very, very excited today for you to take the time to join me. Do me a favor. I'm going to ask early, and I may ask often. If you are not already a subscriber of this channel, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you throw some thumbs up or some hearts, whatever social media platform you may be joining us from. And you can also check out the Leadership Toolkit on just about every podcast platform. So as you know, I have these collaborative and hopefully impactful conversations with leaders from all different verticals of business. And I am so excited today to bring on who's been a longtime friend of mine, and we just met face to face. I am stoked because he is an absolutely impactful, faithful, and charismatic leader in the automotive space, in just about every business space that I've seen him engaged in. So here we go. Today, I introduce to you the amazing Bill Schomburg. Bill, it's great to see you today. Thanks for joining me today, man.
Mike, that introduction, I thought you had a new guest.
No, it's you, man. As we were talking just beforehand, I am so excited to have a conversation with you today. You and I have been connected on social for a long time. We've exchanged a lot of different writings and engaged with one another. But to actually be able to sit down and talk with somebody who you've inspired me, and you have character, and I'm very excited to have a conversation with you today, Bill. So if you would share a little bit about yourself, what you do, who you are, some of your leadership background with the audience that's here today, and let's dive into it, man.
I'll do my best. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. I reflect the words that you shared regarding myself because I feel exactly the same way as you do. You have inspired me. Let's see, 6 years into an automotive journey, knew nothing about this space prior to this. My late wife's passing led to the circumstance where I joined my brother John in some work that he was doing, ultimately unsuccessful in the initial, but it's led us to a place where we think we've found an opportunity that we're going to talk about after the first of the year. So the timing of your invitation, I have admired you. You have been so encouraging in so many ways. Some you may understand, some you may not. But isn't that what influence is about? You're being talked about in rooms you know nothing about. And the Lord's desire for community is reflected in both what you have, the words you have offered me, but more importantly, who you are as a follower of Christ, as an influencer and active worker inside of a dealership, taking those opportunities, truly making a difference in people's lives. So let's see, who am I? I'm 67 years old, widower, have 3 children. They're my wife's children by her first marriage, but they've all said, stop saying step. And so I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. Have asked myself many times and asked the Lord, what am I doing in Cincinnati? Because we basically moved here. My wife's illness was diagnosed about 6 months after we moved here, and she passed 10 months later. So as, what an emotional hook. Oh, great. You've got everybody wondering what's his illness and all these things. Her expressed desire the day that she was diagnosed was, I'm offering a paraphrase of this, but the surgeon gave the diagnosis in her hospital room that day. And she said to him, hey, doc, could you excuse us for a second? And he bolted out the door because surgeons aren't prepared to deliver bad news. And she gave him a way out. And she looked at me across the room and said, if you're going to cry, cry now. Because when we leave here, we're going to live life as Christians faced with a tough circumstance and what a life of faith looks like when the faith can be tested. And so I labeled her a fighter And she's always been a teacher. And through that 10-month season, she continued to teach. And long after her passing, she still teaches all of us, family, people who knew her, in the most amazing ways. One of the ways that the Lord just reveals himself, because in this piece of my life and journey, recently the Lord has asked me, when are you going to stop worshiping your wife who's with me in heaven and start worshiping me? And it's the entire relationship, the manner in which I look at my faith. And it's time to get back in the saddle, because the other aspect of my life, I've had 2 careers prior to this one in automotive. I built sports fields for 20 years. And my first career, I was a professional horse trainer for 20 years.
No kidding.
There's a brief background, and we'll go wherever we want to unpack something.
Absolutely. Well, that's quite an introduction, and certainly God bless you for acknowledging the lessons that you're continuing to be taught, and your wife's influence. What a strong lady, and what an introduction to start our conversation. So thank you for sharing all that, Bill. It's interesting as you're talking about past careers, and we talk about past lives, and I think we have some influence coming into our past lives, our past spaces that we've been in. And one of the things you and I started to talk about just right before we came on the air, and it was interesting because you said, I think you brought it up. You said we have that cliche. What could you talk about for an hour without any preparation? And very quickly, this show could turn into like a 24-hour marathon, right? We could sit and go. We'll start with horse training, talk about leadership, move into business and building sports fields, and now into the advertising space and so forth. One of the things that you brought up several times that I want to lean in on, you talked about how your wife has influenced you, how God has influenced you. And right before we went live, you said, hey, leadership is influence. And one of the things that you had mentioned, you said, hey, a lot of times influence should be positive in nature, but it doesn't always end up in that space. So first off, how are you able to establish influence with other people that you are engaging with? What would you say there?
Well, there's a book called Radical Candor that I just finished in the last few months. The author, I'd never heard of the book and never heard of the author. The author worked at Facebook and Google in some pretty high level positions. And the message that continues to resonate, because it's not a faith book, it's a business book.
Okay.
But the lessons that it offers from faith, the very first thing that she starts to talk about and uses as a continuing theme throughout is, if you're going to have a radical conversation with an employee, with a peer, with your boss, they better know first that you care deeply for them, about the business, whatever the relationship is founded on, so that you can take that throughout your entire life, your kids, your bride, your church, your store, the employees that you deal with every day. Without the foundation of the understanding of what caring deeply looks like, and it isn't talk, it's action. Here's a small tangent of that relationship related to positive versus negative. You can ask anyone who was a positive influence in their life. And in my hiring experience, when I use that question, if a man references his father, his mother, or his grandparents on either side, I'm going to give them an offer no matter what else happens, unless they're just arrested on an outstanding warrant before the interview ends. I mean, it's an automatic reflection of this person has seen something modeled. If I'm interviewing a woman, I ask the same question, but I look for different influences, because men exhibit an influence over women that if the woman trusts you she will tell you about the negative influence before a man will. And she will reveal aspects in her life that will tell you not whether or not she's worthy of an offer, but whether or not she will and how will she impact your organization. Big or small, those rules work no matter what.
Interesting.
I'm not a hiring guru. It's lessons learned on the firing line.
Well, I think it's interesting too that I think oftentimes in leadership, especially right now in business, we're taught to keep everything sort of status quo. Everything's got to be on an even line. And I admire you for bringing up and saying right away, look, there are differences in men and women. There are differences in our responses. There's differences in the way that men and women carry themselves and the way that they're managed in their responses when you're talking about influences. When you're talking about people that influence, so what do you see as the most, and I'm going to lean in on this for just a second, what do you see as some of the most common influencers when you're asking a woman that question? What are their common responses? Because you said, men will say father, grandparents, mother, and I as you're saying that, I agree, and I realize that I go, wow, that's interesting because of the characters we have engaged with us. What do you see as responses most commonly in women?
Well, think about, and I'm referring to a particular aspect of, on social media, we see a lot of LinkedIn, there's announcements. Hey, I'm happy to announce that I'm taking a new position at a dealership.
Sure.
I have people contact me regularly and ask me about the interview process, or should I take this offer, etc. My response, and especially related to a woman interviewing for a position, is, okay, I don't need to know the details of your offer. What I need to know is, did you interview the interviewer? Did you interview the prospective employer? Because women have a far different, and I'm referring specifically to the automotive space.
Sure.
The female employee has a far different experience inside the dealership. I'm going to go to my brother's experience. For those who don't know who my brother is, his name's Bill Schomburg. He entered the automotive space in the early 2000s, lived in the town of Omaha, Nebraska, and he took a position as technical or computer guy because he knew a little bit about the internet, and the Woodhouse organization hired him for better understanding. And he entered this wonderful experience. He had a visionary owner. And let me caveat one thing. What I am going to talk about is a unicorn experience. It's not because he was involved. It was the relationships and the environment and the timing of what he did, what he entered into. So the owner was a true visionary. At the time he was hired, a man named Lance Pitak was the general sales manager. And the three of them grew a small store. They eventually became, I think, 7 brands and maybe 10 or 11 stores. I'm stumbling over the specifics. But the point is, in 5 years, they grew 2 of those stores from relatively selling 70 units a month to each store selling 1,200 a month. They grew a multi-million-dollar organization into a billion-dollar organization in 5 years. People can check the records and whatever. I hate hyperbole, so I'm doing my best never to exaggerate. Here's the point around the female versus the male experience. My brother created the software that the dealerships ran on. In the early 2000s, there weren't any car gurus. There were none of the third-party vendors. There was none of the technology that existed today.
Sure.
And the dealership had no desire to share what they were doing. They just built their organization, ran it at the highest level. One particular aspect that was revealed, the software was designed through my brother's efforts to complement the practical aspects, the daily processes inside the dealership, And they were so focused on those processes that they could try new things. Today, you would call it A/B testing, but they could try new things and knew very quickly, because of their adherence to their processes, whether or not something was beneficial. If it was, they did more of that. If it was not, they eliminated it, took the step back, redirected their efforts. When a female salesperson was hired on the floor, without exception, she became the highest salesperson at that store within a month or two. And,
Okay.
6 months later, the male employees, the salespersons, had driven her out of the store. Now think about that in an organization that had such success, and one aspect that remained, it became the evolution of the thought process around what in the hell are we doing? And so thinking of that in today's environment, it hasn't gotten any better. A particular woman that I'm assisting at this moment, these aren't things I charge for, by the way. I want to make that very clear.
Sure.
Figured out the ability to interview her next employer better than she had in the past. And one of the aspects related to influence, we have to look inside of ourselves to understand what is driving us. And that self-reflection or awareness of what has driven us in the past versus how do we evolve so that the outcomes are more beneficial to us as individuals, making them more beneficial to our families. It's truly a growth pattern, and it's part of being a lifelong learner, something that I've recently recommitted myself to. So I think I kind of wandered over that a little bit, but I hope I gave that.
No, I think that's good. It's interesting. What would you say from your experience watching that? Because, and I've both heard and experienced that as well. I have, interestingly, in the dealership, I have primarily women that work for me. I've always had about 80% females that work for me. I'm curious. You said, hey, this person rose to the top. They sold a bunch. They were the top performer, and within 6 months, the men had driven her out. Why do you think that's deliberate? Do you think it's just nature? How does something like that happen?
Deliberate might be too strong a word.
Okay.
From the aspect of if you sat them down in that generation and said, "What are you doing?" They'd look at you and go, "What do you mean? What am I doing? This is the sales floor is a competitive environment. I'm being competitive, even if some of the mannerisms or actions today, they're almost criminal. You're hurting this person emotionally. You are intentionally being misogynist or any of the cliches. And this is a place where cliches don't necessarily apply, because people who use some of those terms don't know what they mean and want to use them to be hurtful or retaliate in some way. More importantly, it was one aspect of the leadership in this organization that is surprising to me, that they couldn't figure out how to solve that problem, because the very quick rise to get to number one on these floors, 7 brands, 11 stores, that wouldn't go unnoticed, because one thing they limited was turnover. They understood why people would leave or stay with the dealership. But the idea that they couldn't figure this part out remains a question. Like when as my brother and I look for ways to be of actual beneficial influence in stores or groups or whatever, it's always a store problem. You can't blame a group. You can't blame upper management across a group. You have to look at the internal of a particular situation, because they may have similarities, but they are never the same, and one person is not responsible for something going on in another store. They might see it as modeled behavior, because we look for modeled behavior as things we want to duplicate. if it's
Sure.
healthy. But if it's if behavior is tolerated that is detrimental to literally a key buying demographic in automotive today, the influence of the woman in the household, the ability of a male or female to relate to that buying power is pretty substantial. It's critical in understanding what are we doing well.
Hmm.
I'm usually more interested in what can we improve on. And I'm learning to choose my words differently. I saw a quote recently that was attributed to Bruce Lee. Never talk to yourself negatively. You will
Yeah.
believe it, and you won't even understand what's happened when you start to believe that negative talk.
And
It's a
that's true.
reflection. I'm back to my wife again. Um, my wife did not tolerate negative talk in her home ever. And getting called out on that, I did not realize the choice of my words had such negative influence. Today, it breaks my heart to think, man, I wish you could have known this guy.
Yeah. Well, it's what's crazy is when we, I think, often are very conscious of the way we speak to others, our candor that we have when
Mm-hmm.
we're having a conversation. But when we say things to ourselves, it's easy to be a lot harder on ourselves. And I had, Joe, who I work for now,
Mm-hmm.
he said to me one time, he said, man, he goes, I can see it in your eyes. If I said the same things to you that you're saying to yourself between your ears, you'd punch me in the nose, and so it's like when you think about it that way, because we do want to show care for others, and oftentimes, we're a little bit restrained, sometimes maybe when we shouldn't be, and sometimes certainly when we should. But one of those things to realize is, man, that is so true. And when you're talking about that negative talk, either negative outer talk or negative self talk, one of the things that you said, I want to backtrack here just a moment, Bill.
Let me, if I
Yeah,
if I
yeah.
could, I'd like to
Yes.
interview the host.
Sure. Shoot.
You,
Let's
you
go.
said something really powerful a minute ago about 80% of the people that you is manage a fair word
Yeah.
are
Manage,
female.
lead.
How did you get to the place? Did you inherit that? Did it just occur? But that's a really strong statistic around a man who's leading an 80% female workforce in the role that you play. I'd love to hear about that.
Well, okay. So, welcome to the show. Well, and interestingly, there are times I have had 100% women that work for me and a staff of direct reports, 8 to 10 people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now it's 7. So it's a high number, especially in the automotive space. And I would, I have to go back, and this is not, this isn't to butter you up, but I would say definitely I was raised by a single mom. As my mom was a very big influence. I was raised by a single mom and had a sister, and they were heavy influences. And one thing that I learned over time, my dad was a good influence in my life, certainly. And he was a very manly man. He was a good dad, but my parents were divorced, and my dad was a great grandpa. And so I had a bunch of different male influences, I guess, especially in my teenage years, to sort of be able to pick and choose, like what's the thing I want to learn from this person, and yeah, I want to do that, or wow, that sucks, I don't want to repeat that sort of deal. One of the things I realized early on, like you said, when interviewing and hiring people, and prior to even interviewing and hiring people, I coached hockey for close to 20 years, and I had many girls that would play on my hockey teams. One of the things that I realized early on, men and women listen differently. There are different there is no question. Men will listen to what you say, and they will take action that they think is correct to be in alignment with what you're asking. Women will listen, process, and then take action on the meaning, if that makes sense. So when I was like, for example, coaching teenage hockey players. I had two young ladies that played for me, and to this day, I would swear by it. They were the best defensemen when it came, and they weren't playing against other, this was prior to like collegiate level, right? So still young boys and girls that are similar in size, speed, strength, that sort of deal. I had two young girls that were phenomenal defensemen because they would listen to what you said, but they could read the floor differently. They processed it differently. So when they listened to something, they took in all of what you said. Versus the guys, when you had defensemen, yeah, they would listen to what you said, but ultimately they're going after the body. They're diving in, if that makes sense. And so that was one of the things I think I realized early on was men and women, they listen differently. They process the listening and the feeling differently, completely differently. And I took that with me into business from a coaching environment into business. And, I think over time, I probably picked up some of those listening skill sets, the way women listen from my mom and my sister. And I've been, I don't want to say, because it'd be a strong word, but accused of that like being in tune with my feminine energy, if you will. And that's okay.
I
Right?
resemble that remark.
Yeah. You have to be able to listen and process that. And I think it's something that, it goes back, and I'll bring it up in business. It's a very biblical principle. Men need to feel respected. Women need to feel heard. And so I think it's one of those things that when you're managing men, and again, we could go into this for hours. When I'm managing men, when anyone's managing men, like you can make that eye contact, Bill, and there's nothing more than and we got it. Like we have that connection with one another on that respect. Whereas when you're managing women and you're making that same contact, and it's like, well, you may have to act from a male standpoint, you may have to ask, well, how does that make you feel? And then really take the time to listen to the response. And also, like anything else, like we have said before, it becomes cliche because we go, oh, women talk, or they got to be listened to. No, like that's a genuine communication principle. Men and women listen differently. They need to be heard differently. They need to be communicated with differently. So, I think that's something. And I mean, just even in sales, I always had a higher when I had direct reports that were women salespeople that worked for me. I would often have 40 or 50% of my sales floor were women. And part of that was because you would have, somebody that was just a rock star salesperson lady that, people would see that and you attract what you are. So they would attract more rock star women salespeople.
and so powerful, the rule of
yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and the key is, you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are, right? And
big difference. Huge.
And sort of the last thing to put the end cap on this, in a leadership role, and this is very simple, but I'm just going to say it, in a leadership role, anybody that's in a leadership role, you can't tolerate crappy behavior. It is what it is. We all know what it looks like. But a lot of times we'll go, well, that guy's a really good salesperson, or that gal's a really good salesperson, and we'll turn a blind eye. And I think that's a really poor way to lead. You have to call out bad behavior. If something is not right and it's not right, don't let it be the elephant in the room. You bring it to the forefront and you say, hey, that doesn't work for me. And you have to have the fortitude to, if somebody is going to go against what is good for the company, what's good for the team, what's good for themselves or for you, then you have to have the fortitude to cut ties.
There can't be two sets of rules.
Absolutely.
I'd like to wrap one last thing into this aspect.
Yeah.
Rick Warren, for men who are married and young men who aren't yet married, the aspect of faith is so powerful. My wife and I were not believers when we got married. About 3 years later, the Lord revealed himself to me. A few months after that, my wife's comment the day that happened, she was like, does that mean I have to do that? I don't think that's how it works, honey. But fortunately in our marriage,
it'll work out.
A few months later, he revealed himself to her, and So we followed her. We were followers of Christ since 2000. And in Rick Warren's book, A Purpose-Driven Life, the character aspect is referenced in the statement when he wrote, the Lord cares far more about your character cares far more about your character than your comfort in the partner that he selects for you. So it's not about marriage being a comfortable place. It's about what character can you develop because of this partnership he has ordained.
Absolutely. That's a great end cap, Bill, on that piece. So I want to go back on the leadership aspect, and I'm going to go back to interviewing you now. That's one of the
Sorry
things.
for the hijack.
No, hey, we'll go back and forth. I love that. I love this conversation. One piece that you brought up, and we were talking about influence and how it's important. And you had put in one of the notes that you emailed me. You know, Simon Sinek says a world where everybody should have a healthy, positive work environment where people are cared for deeply.
A place they're excited to go to work for every day.
So let me ask you, and I like to get tactical sometimes because I like to take notes. I like to put them in the show notes. And if people are listening to the podcast, what are 3 or 4 specific things that you could do as a leader, that someone could do as a leader to show that they do care about that individual?
Oh, gosh. I'll use a practical example.
Sure.
Someone that I'm closely connected to in the automotive space, a woman named Sarah Hoagie. I met her at a conference 4 years ago. I met she and her husband at a conference a week later in Vegas and got to know the two of them together. And she told me a story about walking into a dealership. She herself has been in every seat in the dealership, including ownership. Now she works in the CRM VDC space, has her own company. Okay. But she was invited in as a consultant with a company for one of those roles. And she came to the meeting face to face and walked into this room that she could sense that you could cut the tension in the room with a knife.
Really? So
she realized there's something here that needs to be understood before we're going to have any luck making progress. She's thinking through this process. And so she asked everyone to share something with, I think there were 8 people in the room. She said, share something that nobody knows about, something that's going on in your life nobody else knows about. One man was going through a divorce. Everybody thought that he was leaving the dealership, he might be going to the bar to have a drink or whatever. There were all of these, in the 8 people, there were these circumstances impacting their work life that no one else in the business knew anything about. My point is, so when she released that tension in the room, all of a sudden everybody understood, wow, we've got to be more connected. So one aspect, get connected. If you're not doing one-to-ones with your direct reports weekly, get on it and be ready to hear things you never imagined were going on, develop more empathy related to what's going on and understanding, because being a boss is not about telling people what to do. Right. Being a boss is about shepherding. I'm back to Simon Sinek. Being a boss is about shepherding the people in your charge, not being in charge of people. Something else that you can do is, are there aspects of your business? And again, here we are in automotive. I learned about a pretty successful store that is struggling mightily, probably 20 years in the making. The store's older than that, but original ownership changed. The fixed ops department is struggling mightily today. Okay. One of the aspects related to me over the holiday season is the fixed op, the techs in the shop have never gotten a bonus. Never.
Just the techs?
Just the techs.
Hmm.
And the GM of the store grew up in the fixed op side. And they're only, in this instance, and it could be way more widespread, but when I heard this, I'm like, huh? How could that possibly be? You give, you reward in a particular season one segment of the business, not understanding the fixed op side is the foundation of the car business. The sales side is bread and butter, or gravy, if you will.
Sure.
But the foundation, this was shared again out of the unicorn experience and other dealerships experience in my brother's walk, because I'm either relating his experience or other conversations that I've had. I don't want anybody to think I've been in this many stores, because I literally have not.
Sure.
But somewhere between 62 and 75 cents of every dollar spent in fixed ops is profit. And to not reward that foundational piece, it's like, that doesn't
That's crazy.
make sense to me. Yeah, I just, so anyway, oh gosh. Be sure that there is equity in the relationship. And it goes to this aspect of early in my work with cognition. I don't think I'm talking out of school here.
Okay.
The early engagement with the founders, the conversations that we had, one of the key aspects, and I relate this, there isn't any way to express the shift in the mentality as to one of the factors that has contributed to this company's growth. There are lots of factors: great product, the right team, failing fast, all those things. But one of the key aspects, there were conversations going on, but they weren't communicating. And you can have lots of talk and no understanding. And until communication starts to happen, Patrick Lencioni, do you know the author Patrick Lencioni?
Yep,
So
I do.
He has the book, 5 Dysfunctions of Team.
We just read that as a team, actually, in our dealership. We read it as a leadership team within the last year.
Oh, you don't know how much I love hearing that. I experienced Patrick in the faith arena to start with.
Okay.
And then had not necessarily followed him a lot. He was early in my faith growth at the Global Leadership Conference. And so, it's not the 7 dysfunctions, it's the 5 dysfunctions of a team.
5 dysfunctions of a team. Yep. It's actually, I looked, it's on my shelf right behind me there. Well, it's just out of frame.
I'd have to turn my camera around, but my copy's up on my bookshelf. So here's the point. It's written as a fable.
Right.
It's not a historical account, but the fable aspect, every part of the evolution, it's like whether you want to talk about the stages of grief or the stages of some evolution in life, the aspects related to, they all revolve around the first one, communication. And you'll know communication is happening. So we've never gone through the book 5 Dysfunctions of Team. It's just something that I had. But the book Radical Candor, 2 years later, from part of a conversation, the evolution of this company, all of those aspects have been part of the evolution. You can't get around them. And one of the first ways you'll know that real communication is taking place, you'll start to have conflict, because everybody enters a relationship thinking, oh, it's going to be great. Everything will be fine. But I'm going to really date myself. Does anybody know the movie St. Elmo's Fire? One is like an 80s coming of age movie.
Yeah, late 70s, early 80s, yeah.
And there's a scene in there where a couple has been dating, and suddenly the woman in the relationship says something, and the guy goes, oh, we're going to start telling the truth.
Yeah.
So when someone actually trusts their team enough to tell the truth, then you'll start to see other people, their emotion, their reaction will reveal their mindset. And then you have something you can work with. So I guess those would be three pieces
I think that's awesome.
to where you can start. And there's no rhyme or reason. People sometimes make the mistake. I'll add this last piece, that a book can be used as a guideline in an organization on something they want to add, something they want to change, something they want to address. It's not about the book. Reading a similar text or reading the same text can create a more powerful conversation, revealing information about your team you didn't have previously. And everyone's opinion matters. People will separate themselves by the conversation because some will choose not to read. Okay, I'm good. Some will choose to read a summary. Okay, I'm good. Some will choose to dig in and really engage in the conversation and participate. Okay, I'm good, because all I care about is the engagement. At whatever level the individual chooses, what they don't appreciate is they're telling us more about themselves than they ever would if we try to tell them what to do. Telling someone what to do means you want them to shut up, be quiet, do what they're told. Your team will never express its value in that environment. And lots of businesses, the majority of businesses, use that style of leadership. Not something I recommend, but I think I said to you, nobody ever appointed Bill Schomburg as the arbiter of what they should do, think, or say.
Sure. Yeah, we said it right before we started chatting. So here's something I want to point out that I find really interesting. You're saying, hey, not every book, like the book is not the healing place. And going back to what you're talking about in relationships, it's just like our personal relationships, right? You get engaged with somebody and it's very easy because you pick and choose and you pick out all the things that you like. And it's on the surface, right? It's everything that you can see from here up, right? And then as time goes on, all of a sudden you start to pick up on these other pieces. And one of the things that you said that I think is really powerful, the strongest teams will have conflict. It doesn't mean constant conflict. But one of the things that I've found in my career is when you have conflict, one of the most powerful questions that you can ask, if you're a moderator, if you're a really good leader, because oftentimes leaders, and there's a bunch of different schools of thought that, leaders speak first and share the idea, leaders speak last, take in what everybody else has to say. I'm from the school that I prefer leaders take the time to listen first and speak second. And because oftentimes if a leader speaks first, then that's where you get that surface relationship. Everyone in the room goes, oh yeah, well, if Bill thinks it's right, if Mike thinks it's right, yeah, let's go with that. Well, then if it doesn't work, they're like, well, that's your fault, dude. Right? You own it.
Instead of support.
Right. And so one of the things that I have found very powerful is when you are listening to, taking in those other perspectives, taking in what it is that people have to say. You said communication is key. You can have a conversation and not communicate. One of the most powerful things you can ask, and I would take note of this, if you are a manager, a leader, somebody listening to this podcast, either live now or listening after the fact, whatever platform you're listening on, take this to heart. When Bill said have conflict, what passed through my head is you have to ask the question when someone says, hey, I feel this way about something, or I think we should do this. One of your most powerful responses can and should be, why do you feel like that?
100%.
Why do you suggest that?
If you don't take that next step, you miss the opportunity to understand more about your team and to develop the reflected trust around that interaction. If I may, the word conflict, and I used it, but as you were speaking, I realized there's always going to be tension in the relationship. it needs to be healthy tension versus unhealthy tension. You will not be able to remove the tension. Your ability to direct it in a healthy manner is key as one of your leadership abilities.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think years ago, I went to see Tony Robbins speak live. I think 2006, and one of the things he was talking about was fear, right? Because fear creates conflict,
Mm-hmm.
right? It sounds like a Star Wars thing now. Fear creates conflict. Conflict creates, right, suffering and so forth. But when we have this fear, we push back against the fear, right? This is us. This is fear. This is us. This is fear, and we push back, and we're constantly pushing with it. And one of the pieces that he shared, he said, "Look, what you need to do is it's okay. Just open your hand and embrace it and dance with it." Right. And so when you have conflict, it's okay. You ask the question, well, hey, why do you feel like that way? Allow someone to articulate, allow them to speak what the, you know, what it is to them. And what'll be amazing is sometimes people will say, well, I don't know, I just heard that. And they
Mm-hmm.
may not be able to fully uh, articulate and encompass what it is, but because they heard that thing, they're regurgitating it. And you say, okay, well, what other ideas do we have? And somebody else brings something else up. Well, why do you feel that? And they're able to articulate it in a way that makes sense for the business, that makes sense for the team. And that's how you end up, like you said, seeing other perspectives, bringing people to the other side of the conversation, whatever that conversation may be in business. So I think that's a really powerful piece. One of the things that I've always admired about you, Bill, and I'm going to go here. We're about 45 minutes in. I always try and keep about 45 minutes to an
Okay.
hour.
Okay.
I've always admired, from our engagements online, the amount of positive influence that you have, and that you are an encourager. You are somebody that really seems to embrace and empower people. And I just want to ask you if you can put this into words. How are you able to so successfully do that? What is it that allows you as a person, if you can pinpoint it, to really look for the positives around you, the positives in people, and to constantly encourage others? Is that just a natural characteristic? Is it something you have to work at? What is it that if you can pinpoint some of those things for us?
Oh gosh. There's a flood of memories and experience that come to mind. So I failed at that, and I'll relay a real quick um, experience,
Sure.
and one that I, to this day, if there's things you could ever change in your life. So as a horse trainer, I was recognized, successful, achieved some of the highest levels of recognition, if you will.
Okay.
And in my early development, there was a customer, the mother of a daughter. The daughter had, to this day, she's one of the most exceptional equestrian talents I've ever met. She did not make a living in the horse business, but I met her when she was about 7 years old. And her grandmother said to her mother, "What are you thinking leaving that girl down there with him over a weekend or all day? What could you possibly be thinking?" And her mother said, "Might be the best environment that I've ever encountered." Well, so I had a very practiced routine in preparing some of my show horses for the arena. And this young lady's name was Tammy. She was probably at this time 13 or 14 years old. She had permission to ride any of the stock that were in my barn. Nobody had that license. Nobody else ever had that license or trust. And so we were at a state fair, and she was helping prepare my horses, and she unknowingly violated one of the steps in my processes. And as I brought one horse out of the show arena and took the one that she had helped prepare, I just unloaded on her mercilessly because I was so aggravated, and all she was trying to do was help. And her mother, one of the strongest women you'd ever meet, she was an OR nurse, ER nurse, manager, very, very experienced woman in leadership, let me know after that part of the show ended just what I had done, because I didn't even know it. It just burst out of me. I wounded this young person in a way that I would never tolerate from somebody else. And yet I had done exactly what I hated the most. And her mother was wise enough, talented enough, furious enough to confront me in the most unbelievably powerful way. To this day, if I could change a single thing in my life, I'd have to choose between my wife's death, being able to save her if that were in my power, or changing that moment in time. And that moment is 45 years ago. So be self-aware about the mistakes you make. Your successes aren't going to teach you anything. The chemical reaction in your body around what you receive when you accomplish something or achieve an award matters not a single thing. Learn from your mistakes in the best way you can, and take that information and learning forward.
Man, that is so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And it's a vulnerable moment, man. It's very powerful, very vulnerable moment. And I think that it's people need to take note, right? Like you said, be self-aware and be willing to learn, because obviously that was a life-changing moment for you.
Well, remember her mother's mother bear instinct. You want to fear that.
Yeah, that too. But my wife has one of those. She's absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, Bill, as we're coming down to the tail end of an hour, just thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing, for having this conversation, for sharing some insight, for being vulnerable enough to share that that piece of, where you said, that failure that you took to learn from here at the end. Any final thoughts, sort of, as we come down to the end moments here?
Just a similar reflection, Mike. Your invitation to join you, following you all this time, and now getting to have this in-person conversation. Now I'm going to have to make an excuse to come to Colorado and meet you. And
absolutely, I would love it.
Please continue with all the work that you're doing. It's powerful. It's important. And to the idea of the unicorn experience, for 6 or 7 years, for 6 years for sure, I've bought into the idea that everybody wants the unicorn experience.
Sure.
I'm sorry, you can't want it. You can't even create it. Everybody functions at the level that they're willing to invest in and risk. And I'll relate that to cognition. I'm so blessed in the experiences in my life. I've dealt with horses at the highest level of horse business. I've built sports fields if I wanted to be a name dropper, I could drop names and whatever. And now I've had the good fortune to meet some of the highest performing individuals in the automotive industry. And then as a capstone of this season, Carson and his team have truly created, they use the rocket emoji and all those kind of things. I almost violated a rule that we have as a company. We don't talk about how influential we might be, but I will share the aspect of being invited into the environment with the team that Carson and Cognition have created. It's a once in a lifetime experience, and I've had a lifetime of big experiences. And the Lord continues to just reveal what my influence, what my work in his kingdom might be. And I'm so grateful and thankful, especially continuing today with this conversation with you.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and take us out. Just hang out for a minute here, if you would. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So that is going to bring us to a close for another Leadership Toolkit. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to tune in and listen to the stories, to listen to the wisdom that Bill brought to us today. Do me a favor. Make sure that you like the episode, throw some thumbs up on it, share this episode. You can tune in on every podcast platform, share it with somebody that may need to hear this message, because I think there's a lot of power and a lot of wisdom in this episode of the Leadership Toolkit. I appreciate you. I value your time. So please do that. And until we speak again next week, make sure continue to be great. We'll talk to you soon, everybody.